request, and you'll have been provided those before, in advance of this meeting. Can I also advise that the report on Skills Academy is to be deferred, so that is withdrawn, and they've also withdrawn their deputation request. I'll ask now if the committee can agree the deputations in turn. We have a application item 10 for Carnoustie and Monteith Men's Shed. That's Mr. Bill Gibson and Mr. George Gamak. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Can I point of clarification here? Well, at this time, Councillor Fairweather, sorry, something came to my door. So I think you've done declarations of interest.
No, I haven't.
You haven't yet. That's fine. My apologies. I had to dash to the door. My apologies.
Right. No problems, Councillor Boyd. Okay, the second deputation is again item 10 for Carnoustie and Monteith Men's Shed, and that's from Roger Brunton. Is that deputation agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, and the third one now is an offer, is item 14, an offer to buy non-surplus HRA asset at Ingalls Court. That deputation be by Mr. Guild. Can I just say to members now that I'm minded not to agree this, and the reasons for that are that Mr. Guild is the wanting to purchase this. He is the person in item 14. I find, and I am extremely uncomfortable. We do have another paper which is exempt, coming up for agreement. I would be extremely worried that this a deputation could affect the judgment of councillors in this committee. So I'm going to put forward that we do not agree this deputation. If anybody wishes to bring in an amendment, they can do so now. There's no right. So is it agreed we do not accept the deputation?
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I'll simply now move. What I would like to say, all deputations will be allowed into the meeting, and I'll advise members that the deputations, that the committee will hear the deputation immediately prior to their item. Okay, I will go on to 1, apologies and substitutes.
No apologies, convener.
Declarations of interest.
I have it's not a declaration, but I have a connection with item 10 in respect of the Men's Shed cat application to the for the Panmure Centre, by virtue that I am actually mentioned in the papers, as each of you will have read, that I was at that meeting. I've been at various meetings, and I've been heavily involved since 2015 with the Save the Panny campaign. However, I've applied the objective test and concluded that I have no interest to declare.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Boyd. I've got Councillor Miles.
Yes, like others, I've received quite a bit of correspondence regarding item 14. Never made any comment on it. I've also attended Community Council where it was discussed, and again made no comment. So I will remain in the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Macmillan Douglas.
Thank you, convener. I have the same point as Councillor Miles on item 14. I have received various correspondence but have not commented. On item 10, I am working with Mr. Roger Brunton on something else, but it's in no way connected with item 10, and therefore I intend to stay in the room and vote if necessary.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd just like to say actually that most of us will have had correspondence regarding item 14. So perhaps that should be recorded. Councillor King.
Yes, Convener, like yourself, I'm getting fed up with the continual lobbying by Mr. Guild on the various things that he wants to take over from the council. I don't think it's appropriate that members should be lobbied in this way consistently. If he's got anything to take up, send it to the appropriate officer, and if necessary, then we can hear about it. But certainly, I'm getting fed up receiving things every day from Mr. Guild. I don't open them, I don't read them, I just put them straight in a holding folder where I can access them if I need to. But I've certainly no interest to declare, but I'm just declaring that I'm getting fed up with this continuous lobbying.
Thank you for that, Councillor King. Okay, have we got any others? I don't see any other names coming up. Okay, we'll go to number 3. That's the minutes, the previous the previous meeting, and submit for approval. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. We will go to the capital monitoring general capital fund programme for 2020-21. You've got the recommendation. Are there any questions, Councillor Macmillan Douglas?
I'm sorry, Convener. Mine's a comment.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Duff?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I did have one question, and it relates to page 9 and the route action plan A90. I note that this is I understand, a high priority for the administration, and I just wanted to get a little bit more detail why it is underspent by 1.039 million, given that it is a priority for the administration.
Thank you for that. Can we go to the officers? Perhaps they can help Councillor Duff here. Ian Lorimer. Oh, Ian Cochrane, beg your pardon.
Thanks, Convener, through yourself, if I may. Thanks, Councillor Duff. Indeed, the route action plan is obviously a piece of work that's been fundamental to Tay City Deal, and we have looked at reprofiling the expenditure to match the Tay City Deal discussions that have been going on, and it's work that we're continuing to progress. So just that helps.
Councillor Duff?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm conscious of the link with the Tay City Deal. I'm also conscious that we can't spend significant sums of money on this project until we have determined the route. And as I understand it, that's the position we're at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you, Councillor Duff. Any further questions? No, we'll go to comments. Councillor Macmillan Douglas.
Thank you, Convener. Perhaps I could immediately comment on Councillor Duff's question. I was interested. He's called the Montrose A90 link a priority for the administration. I very much hoped it was a priority for this council, and a priority therefore for Councillor Duff. But that wasn't the reason. That was not the comment that I was intending to make. I was just going to refer to the paper and congratulate the Director of Finance and colleagues for producing this paper. We all note the substantial underspend, particularly on roads and housing. This obviously is due to the COVID-19 health measures not allowing work to take place. One of the consequences of that is that you will see also from the paper that borrowing is substantially reduced, as work has not had to be funded at this time, although hopefully it will be funded in the future. At the last CPMG on the 8th of this month, time was spent on looking at how we were going to catch up the programme. It's important for two reasons. First, because the work, particularly on housing, is extremely necessary, and I know Councillors Fotheringham and Salmond are carrying that forward. Also, the catch-up can considerably assist our economic recovery programme for Angus, which is so important for jobs and well-being of people in Angus. So I just wanted to commend the paper, convener.
Thank you for that, Councillor Macmillan Douglas. Councillor Duff, you've still got your hand up?
Oh, apologies, I will lower it.
No bother, no problem. Any further comments? No, you've got the recommendation. It's 1.1. It's recommended that the committee reviews and scrutinises. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We go to number 5. That's the revenue monitoring 2020-21 and renewal and repair fund position. You've got the recommendations. Are there any questions? No questions. Any comments? Councillor Macmillan Douglas.
Thank you, convener. I just again wanted to commend this paper to the committee. It's an important paper. It is just a snapshot in time. Of course, we only had our updated budget last month for the 2021 year. I suppose the thing that really comes through it most strongly is the challenging time that is faced by the Health and Social Care Partnership. Members will remember that at our budget discussion, we noted a commitment given by the Scottish Government to help social care partnerships with costs that arose particularly from COVID-19. So that's a very important element in our forward planning. Thank you very much, convener.
Thank you for that, Councillor Macmillan Douglas. Any further comments? I don't see any. Okay, we've got the recommendations. 1 is review and scrutinise, and 2 is note the renewal and repair fund position. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
We go on to number 6. It's the extension of debt collection and sheriff officer services. The reports by the Director of Finance. You've got the recommendations. Are there any questions? No questions? Any comments? Councillor Hans.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I just wanted to comment on page 46 in terms of the price quality, and I was glad to see that we have still looked at 70% quality, 30% price on this one, and it's good to see that although people in Angus, some people are going to be having a pretty difficult time, then we are going to be dealing with gathering debt fairly sensitively. So I just wanted to make a comment and to say that I was glad that we were sticking to that ratio.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hans. Any further comments? Don't see any. Okay, we've got the recommendations. 1.1 is recommended the committee agrees to delegate authority to the Director of Finance to 1, extend the existing contract, and 2, procure debt collection and sheriff officer services. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 7 is Common Good Funds project approvals. You've got the recommendations. There are 2. 1 is for Common Good for the council chamber ceilings repairs, and the other one is for Montrose Common Good Fund toilet provision at Montrose Splash. I see that all 4 ward members have agreed them. So are there any comments, questions or comments? No. You've got the recommendation. It's just to approve. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, item agenda 8 is the appropriation of areas of land between general fund and housing revenue account, HRA, at Emmerslaw Drive and Drive Arbroath. You've got the recommendations. Any questions? Don't see any questions, any comments? No comments. Okay, the recommendations are 1.1. 1 is approves, 2 is approves, and 3 is notes. Is the report agreed?
Great.
Thank you. Okay, we've now got agenda item 9, which is the community asset transfer application. Perhaps we could bring in the deputation. Oh, no, beg your pardon. That's been withdrawn. My apologies. So we'll go to agenda item 10, community asset transfer applications, Carnoustie and Monteith Men's Shed. We've got the recommendations. Are there any questions? My list is not going up right and down here, so I've not got all names, unfortunately, coming up. Does anybody want to say if they've got any questions?
Is this, Councillor Fairweather, is this questions to officers or questions to the deputations?
Right.
We're to have deputation.
Right. Can we take the deputation first?
Thanks, David. Yes, that would be ideal. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take the deputation first. Can we let in? It's Mr. Bill Gibson and Mr. George Gammett first.
Convener, Mr. Gammett and also Mr. Brunton and the other deputation are in the meeting.
Thank you.
Gammett seems to be on mute.
I'm George Gammett. I'm the secretary of the Carnoustie Monteith Men's Shed. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Mr. Gammett. Mr. Gammett, between yourself and Mr. Bill Gibson, you've got 10 minutes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, convener. The circumstances of this community asset transfer application is, first of all, because the shed desperately needs a more secure base, but it's also based on our concern and commitment for the Panmure Centre as a community resource. We began our life there in 2015 and we're quite fond of the place. We attended a whole lot of meetings between August 2019 and February of this year of various groups that were interested or possibly interested. Interest, in fact, waned, and at one of the meetings there was only myself and Councillor Boyd present. At the last meeting in February, it seemed as if there might be a consortium being formed to put forward some kind of bid, but it seemed to us in the shed that this was not likely to happen very quickly. And the trustees discussed this and decided to go ahead with a request on our own behalf. And we did this, and it was validated and agreed, and now the submission is up for discussion. The application, we emphasised in our application that it had to be made just by the shed alone as a constituted community transfer body. As such, we couldn't include other groups at that point, and that's why the discussion about the occupation of the place is set out in terms of, partly in terms of how we would use it if we were the sole occupants. And this has led some people to criticise it on the basis of that we would monopolising the entire ground floor. But we also at the same time did stress a wider perspective on the use of the centre. At all times, both in the substance of our application and elsewhere, we have stressed this. Obviously, there are tensions always among mixed use, a place where there's mixed usage, but that these tensions are just things that have to be addressed and dealt with. However, it should be noted that the shed's pattern of activities up till now has been 3 afternoons a week of 3 hours, and therefore we are not talking about being in full-time activities, although we would like to expand and develop. And we wouldn't like to see the Panmure Centre, if we were to go there, being left empty for long periods of time. And that's why it would be important to negotiate usage with various groups in terms of their requirements. The distribution of space in the centre raises similar issues. The nature of our heavier items of machinery will clearly require a fixed location. Noise is a consideration, although the reality of the noise is that there are seldom a whole lot of machines on at once, and usually only for short periods of time. We are also keen to have quieter areas, dust-free areas, where we can do things that aren't just banging and running machinery. And the vast hall on the upper floor clearly offers lots of potential if it could be subdivided. And the matter of access to that upper floor also needs to be addressed. On funding, we've got a fairly good track record, but this, of course, is on a slightly larger scale. As we've seen from the documentation, as you'll see from the documentation, we've identified a range of possible funding sources. But we are concerned that if we were to go forward, we could only do this after the outcome of this feasibility study, which was in which £10,000 was put forward from participative budgeting. This would have to be carried out and completed because we couldn't really go blindly forward without knowing what might be discovered from that study. And we understand it has not yet been set in motion, and we hope it would be. So assuming that if we were to go forward and occupy the Panmure Centre along with other groups, if we secure funding to for the future of the premises, there's always a concern at the end of that period there might be there should be some kind of assurance, or it would be good to have some kind of assurance that the future of the place would be available for the community. Because if there are very few resources for the community in Carnoustie, and we think this is a really important asset to be cherished for the future. One small point finally, we have become aware just in recent days that furniture is being cleared out of the centre. We're a bit puzzled by this, not sure why this should be happening at this time, but we mention it now in the hope that somebody may clarify why that is happening. That's the conclusion of my remarks, Convener. Thank you for allowing time to speak.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Gammack. Does Mr. Bill Gibson wish to speak? Because there's still 5 minutes left.
Mr. Gibson isn't in the meeting.
Okay. Right. Well, right. I'll simply then move to right. Are there any questions of Mr. Gammack?
Yes, Councillor Ferrer, I've got 2 or 3 for George, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
I will start, and I know you hate me doing this, but I am going to start with a comment, but it leads on nicely to it. I think it's got to be commended that a lot of hard work has gone into this with George and the team, and it should be noted that commended for the enthusiasm that was discussed, and it was actually discussed at the Community Council last night. But everyone at that Community Council meeting realises it's a very big undertake, and therefore it led to the questions. Hence the reason why I'm bringing it this way round. That was put to me. I sat silently at it. Hard for me for 45 minutes to sit silent, as I'm sure you'd agree, Councillor Fairweather. And so here we are with a few questions that were added. I think that the community itself is a little bit worried about the wider community interest. After all, it is known as the Panmure Community Centre. George, how many other groups have you approached so far to fill up upstairs in layman's terms? Because it would be awful to see it sitting there empty. Have you approached any groups yet?
No, we haven't made any approaches. We had one group indicated would be interested, but I have inquired after the contact details for all those who were at the very first meeting in August the 12th, 2019. But I was told I couldn't have this information for because of data protection and privacy. So I haven't been able to take that forward, but so I have to do more work in finding out how to contact the various groups. But I do have a list of them from that meeting and would hope to pursue that.
Thank you. And depending on how this meeting goes, any help that any 3 of the councillors, we're all very much backing the saving the Panmure. and so any help that we can give over the next while, we'll gladly help you. You know, I see you're asking for a 10-year lease. Can I ask why, and would you accept a variation on this?
Yes, we'd be open to discuss the lease, certainly. We obviously have to go for at least a 5-year lease, because no funders will look at you if you've got anything less than that. So minimum was 5. We thought 10 was perhaps you know, a better. I mean, some groups have got, the Arbroath shed has got I think a 25-year lease on their premises. So Scottish Association of Men's Sheds, I think, suggest 25-year lease, but we decided to go for somewhere in the middle between the 5 and the 25. But we're open to negotiation, discussion on that one.
Great, thank you, George. An excellent business plan that has been presented, but I've done a little bit of financial digging myself. I know all too well how much it is to heat a large Victorian building, and I think you were being a little bit optimistic at your energy costs. So I did a little bit of I got officers to do a little bit of digging, and this again is due to the longevity and your finances within it. I think you put down 500 as the things, and again, this is something to hopefully negotiate or chat about. But unfortunately, the heating cost alone, on average, for the last 5 years, is 6,370. And again, I would not want you guys who are doing all this hard work to commit to something that you wouldn't have the finances behind to do this. We have to heat that building in the short term as well, because I also know all too well, if you don't heat a Victorian or a Victorian building, boy, the costs increase terribly with that. So I just want I just don't know what your thoughts are. It has to be a question. Is there any thoughts on where you got your figures from for the heating costs?
Yes, we've got 1,500 per annum for electricity and gas. Well, there's no gas in the place, but it was suggested that gas central heating might be installed. These figures really were based on usage by ourselves alone. There are a number of other points, I think, in our budget where we're probably, well, overall, I think we would be prepared to accept that our budgeting may be on the low side. Because 500,000 probably is an underestimate, but the 1,500 for heating the place for ourselves alone we felt would probably be about right. But if it were to be heated 7 days a week, then you're right, it would be an entirely different perspective on the matter. We'd have to up that figure considerably.
Great. Thank you, George. That was all my questions, and I very much appreciate you eloquently answering them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Are there any further questions of the deputation, Mr. Gammack? No.
Yes, Convener, Councillor Whiteside and Hans are indicated. I've got
Thank you. As my machine seems to be giving me problems. Councillor Hans first.
I think it was actually Councillor Whiteside beat me to it, but never mind. I was just wondering, George, given that it is a Victorian building, have you looked into any possibility to see if there's any green schemes to try and help with your heating costs? Given how good you've been at looking at other sources of funding, I wondered if this was a possibility that you might consider.
Certainly would. We haven't looked at that yet. Maybe I've got a block in my head from green schemes from my experience of installing one in my own home, which was a nightmare. But okay, I take your point. Yes, that would be certainly an important area to follow. I mean, we haven't picked up a lot of further explorations on funding at the moment, but I realise a lot of funding bodies at the moment are kind of in suspense, and the Heritage Lottery Fund, for example, has stopped all activity for this year and won't be picking up again till next year. So Hopefully by that time it might be possible. But I take your point about the green funds, and we would explore these, yes.
Great stuff, thank you.
Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener. First of all, I'd like to congratulate George and his group for the persistence, because it's been a long haul trying to find a permanent location for your group, and you're doing a lot of great work. My questions were actually very similar to Councillor Boyd's. I was going to ask about other groups, but one thing I was wondering if you anticipate carrying on with the agreement with the Panmure Preschool to use the first floor. That was one thing. The other question was also about the lease. I would have thought, given the large amount of investment required, that perhaps a longer lease than 10 years would have been better for funders, but that's obviously dependable on various things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well. Again, we take that on board, and if as people are suggesting, there's an advantage with a longer lease, then we would certainly look at that. The other point. I'm sorry. Could you remind me what the other point was? The first point.
I was just wondering if you had spoken to the preschool playgroup that currently use the first floor, whether that arrangement would carry on possibly.
I had thought they would not be using the place anymore. Are they still? Are they not moving to the new centre?
No, I believe that's the nursery. Reading from the papers, there was a playgroup and the nursery using the building currently.
I can interject with that one. That group are moving to the new purpose-built one. So I think it's put into 3 different places, and they will move to that one, and therefore it's purpose-built. But okay. that's why we have the void upstairs. Okay. Councillor Whiteside, just you probably want to know that that's the local community stuff that's going on. So that's what's happening there.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Boyd. Have we got any further questions for George?
Councillor Duff, convener.
Councillor Duff.
My apologies, Councillor Devine it is.
Councillor Devine.
Thanks, convener. George, I really enjoyed reading your application. It was very full and beautifully worded, I have to say. But I was wondering, when you mentioned the feasibility study, I wondered what that was and who had been going to organise that, as it hasn't happened yet. Can you just enlighten me there?
My understanding was that the Community Development Trust was going to take this on. That's as much as I know, and I don't think it has happened yet.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Devine?
Yeah, well, kind of. It's obviously not happened yet, but maybe the next person will be able to tell us about that.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, I'm going to ask the officers regarding what George asked about furniture removal. Can somebody maybe enlighten me to that one, please? Mr. Cochrane.
Sorry, convener, trying to find my mute. I'm afraid I can't actually, convener. I'm happy to look at it and let Mr. Gammack know. We do have surplus office furniture. I know some members are inquiring about that, and we can maybe see what we can help out with the men's shed if they are after furniture.
Okay, thank you.
We weren't specifically looking for furniture. We just were concerned as to how much of the contents of the Panmure Centre were being shifted out, because we only heard of certain items, but we wanted to find out if what extent this clearance was happening.
Councillor Fairweather, I think again can help in this situation. I think what should be happening is more furniture should be coming in. Gavin Balfour will be the one who will know what's going on there, Ian, because basically stuff that was used to be in the access office and the other borough chambers were stored up in Forfar, and I'm now led to believe that it's now will be placed back in. But that's different to the contradiction. We should actually be getting more put back in, not stuff getting taken away. So we need to get some form of clarification there. Thank you.
Okay, right, thanks, Councillor Boyd. I'm trying to send a message here, but it's not going. Anyway, Stuart Ball has come in. He said he perhaps can answer the feasibility study question. Stuart, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, thanks, convener. It's really just to give you a little bit more information about that. I know Mr. Brunton is here, and he might allude to this as well when he speaks. But the £10,000 feasibility study that's been referred to was the subject of a participatory budgeting application from the Carnoustie Development Trust, and obviously that was submitted before the men's shed applied for the CAT transfer. So things have clearly moved on. The £10,000 is still there; it's still available. As far as I'm concerned, I'd like that money to be spent, and I think from what we've heard from Mr. Gammack, there's an openness and a willingness, certainly from the men's shed perspective, to work with other groups. And ideally, what I'd like to see here is that £10,000 used for all the groups in Carnoustie to come together and come up with a plan about how the Panmure Centre is put to best use. I think Mr. Gammack has said he would welcome that opportunity. So for me, that was the way I would like to go with that. But Mr. Brunton may have a view, because it was the Carnoustie Development Trust that were successful in their application for the feasibility study, and ultimately, if the final decision would lie with them as they were the applicants for that participatory budgeting money.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Ball. Okay, have we got any further questions? George, can I thank you for your deputation?
Thank you.
Members, can we now move to the deputation from Mr. Roger Brunton?
Reid.
We'll let Mr. Brunton in, please.
Hello, convener. Thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Brunton. Mr. Brunton, you've had a long time since I've seen you, when it was many years ago when I was in the Chambers on Development Standards, and I do remember your long and lengthy and very comprehensive speeches. You've got 10 minutes, Mr. Brunton.
You haven't changed it at all, Councillor Fairweather. Yes, I'm here representing the Carnoustie Development Trust, and we do not want to speak against the men's shed at all. It's a great organisation, lang may their lum reek, and I hope they continue with the Panmure Centre. The Carnoustie Development Trust has been working on it, and we've prepared a written feasibility study and done a drawing, and we've got drawings from Angus Council. We've done sketch designs of what can happen. I've issued them to the local councillors, but I've asked them to keep them private, because we're not in a position yet to actually make them public. Because as everybody on the screen here knows, as soon as anything goes out and people can see it, there will be 100 reasons why that shouldn't happen, and about 2 who think it's a good idea. So until everything was put in place, we didn't think it was a really good idea to do it. In saying that, and we've corresponded with Mr. Gammack in the men's shed, we've kind of let them know that we would like to run in parallel with them. And the only reason that I'm coming here this afternoon is not to say, please don't give the lease to the men's shed. I think you should, because the men's shed are an integral part of what the Carnoustie Development Trust want to see the building used for. The only reason that we'd like to comment is that 10 years would give us, the Carnoustie Development Trust, a difficulty with carrying on the feasibility study for funders. Because just as you mentioned, 25 years is a good, if there is nobody else involved in it, then 25 years may well be a good time. But in this particular case, if the Carnoustie Development Trust are going to secure funding from, and George mentioned the heritage, there are various trusts, there are various other organisations that we know of that could help it, then a 10-year lease is a hindrance. And we suggest that it's given a 3-year lease. And the reason behind that is that it would allow the feasibility study to be carried out and put in place, because we've got to work out who's going to run it, because the money that we're talking about to do what we're talking about, hoping that the building can be used for, is to put in a lift, to create a cinema come multi-purpose space on the top floor that you mentioned, with retractable seating, with all the toilets being upgraded, with the kitchen being upgraded, a new cafeteria being installed, the lifts and all of it, and it's possible to do it. You know, after this meeting, we give Councillor Boyd the permission to share what's on the drawing, and hopefully everybody will see the merit of it. Of course, it all needs planning consent and a proper feasibility study done. But we didn't want to carry on and go to print or go to paper with the feasibility study and waste the £10,000 that we'd applied for until we knew what the CAT application for the men's shed was. If the feeling round the table or around the screen is that, no, men's shed, good answer, there you are, there it is, then there is no point in Carnoustie Development Trust carrying on with our feasibility study. Now, everything, because of COVID, and I know everything gets blamed on COVID, but it's true in this instance, we could get no answers from anyone about taking this further on. We haven't applied properly for the money that we'd been granted yet, but we have every intention. You guys, Mr. Ball and all the rest of them, would like, quite rightly, to see estimates for fees for the feasibility study. We know that the feasibility study will cost more than £10,000. I was involved with the Kinloch Centre for a long time, chairman of that, trying to get the feasibility. We got £20,000 from the lottery, and that was great, but it only just covered the feasibility study. The Freecombe Hub, we were involved with that after the feasibility study was done, but that feasibility study was 500 pages long, and it took a lot of time and money to do it. We fully intend doing it. We're committed to doing it. We've spoken to George, we've had letters going back and forward explaining one another's position. And we would like to see the men's shed in there because it's part of our written drawing, if you like, the written design, that they have a big part of it to the side to be extended or whatever. We've got plans to put in solar power and all sorts of eco heating. There is no gas, thank goodness, because it's, you know, gas in 10 years' time will just not be installed anywhere as a heating. So we know all that. We're fully committed to it. We get updated reports every month when we have our board meeting for the Carnoustie Development Trust. We're committed. All that I would like to assure the council, we are committed. We are wanting to do this project. We do want to encourage and involve the men's shed, but we'd like a 3-year lease to them rather than a 5 or a 10, just because we would end up finding it easier to get funding sources if there wasn't a long-term lease in place. Now, if after 3 years we haven't been able to convince people to either give us money or to carry on with the feasibility study, may end up saying, no, you can't afford this, you can't afford the staffing, you can't do that, then by all means, the men's shed should take up the next 7 years and God bless them. But in the interim, we hope that you would grant a 3-year lease so that the feasibility can be carried out properly and we can bring the Panmure Centre back into the 21st century for all of Carnoustie. We've talked to loads and loads of organisations about how they're going to use it, the food charities, computers, tutorials, plus all the usual yoga and Strictly Come crocheting and all these things. And
you've got a minute left.
It's all I need, Mr. Fairweather. it's a great idea. Good luck to the men's shed. We want them to be part of what our project is, but not for 10 years, please 3.
Right. Thank you for that. It's given me a lot of thought here. Are there any questions to Mr. Brunton? Councillor Hands.
Yeah, thanks, convener. The problem here is, and it's a crazy problem, obviously both organisations are very, very keen to work together, but from each of the presentations we're told we need X number of years for funders. So what discussions have taken place in terms of the development trust plans for the building and Carnoustie and the Murphy Bench Shed plan for the building? Because obviously it's sounding like you both want to do very, very similar things. So the problem I have here is that the difficulties you both seem to be saying about the funders, and I hope that we don't have the situation that one organisation loses out in preference to the other. I just wonder how much discussion you've had and looking at the different plans for the building. And I want to ask officers questions. Are we able to do that just now rather than when the report comes up itself?
No, it would be this is only for Mr. Brunton.
Yeah, I know, and that's my difficulty in terms of the issue with you go one way and somebody's funders are satisfied, you go the other way and the other funders aren't satisfied. So I think I just want to know how much you have both looked at the plans and looked at where the plans are very, very similar, and to see whether there's an accommodation in the early years that would allow the men's shed to be around for the 10 years they're looking for, but not to stop the Community Development Trust progressing their plans either.
Thank you, Councillor Hands. Any further questions? I know, Mr. Brunton, you want to come back in. I'll allow that.
Thank you. It's just to clarify that we see the men's shed as always being part of this, and it's not that they'll need to move out for 10 years while this work gets done, or if the work ever gets done. But the problem is, if we ask a funder for money and there is a 10-year lease, I don't know what Mr. Gamak's, we've asked for a meeting with Mr. Gamak, and he's, until today, we've not actually been able to arrange a meeting. We have offered it, but we need to work together. Carnoustie is a very small town. Nobody can do anything without somebody else either disagreeing or wanting to support it. And we see the men's shed as being it, and a permanent part of it. They have a part on the drawings and the design that put out. They're part of it. They're even written on the drawing as being part of it. We don't see any problem in them being there. It's just the paper exercise of a funder, whether it's one of the trusts, one of the heritage trusts, the lottery, or any of them. They always ask, are we obligated to any kind of lease? And all I'm saying is give the men's shed a lease, but don't be over generous with it so that we can approach funders. That's all. They're always going to be part of this, the Panmure Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Brunton. Councillor Devine.
Thanks, convener. I wonder if I could ask for a deferment on this, because I do feel that there really needs to be more discussion between the two parties, but also with officers of the council. Like Councillor Hands, I just feel I thought I knew what I was going to do when I came in here today, and I'm now, because of what Mr. Brunton's been saying, quite confused. And it seems a bit cart before horse, or horse before cart, or something like that. Would that be possible? Not necessarily a huge long deferment, but maybe come to a special meeting or something like that.
Councillor Devine, I think you've right. I don't know if you're reading my thoughts or not. I've got a whole list of things that I've written down after listening to. Anyway, I'm going to take that there are other people wanting to come in. I'll take them first, and then I'll give you my thoughts on what you've said, and I can assure you it's very similar. So, Councillor King.
Yes, convener. I'm quite concerned about this one as well. But I'd like to ask Mr. Brunton, if we were to give the men's shed a 10-year lease with a 3-year break point, where the whole thing could be looked at again, would that satisfy the problems that he has with his funders? Because I must admit, anytime I've heard about funding, the longer the lease or the longer you have, the better. I've never heard of a situation where it requires a shorter lease to get funding. And I'm just wondering if a lease, a break point on it, which would allow maybe a change of lease at that time, or an amendment to the lease, or allow the men's shed to continue, could be an answer. I don't know, I'd have to ask officers about that as well. But I mean, it's something we can throw into the mix. But I must admit that this one needs some time on it. And I would support a deferment if that was to be agreed by the members.
Okay, thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Sturrock.
Yeah, thank you, convener. What I'm listening to all the parties and best of luck to them, but all I'm picking up here is mixed messages, and for that reason, and I would quite happily support the idea that Councillor Devine has put forward and to defer this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sturrock. We've got Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener. I can understand the reason for the suggestion for the deferment. I just feel for the men's shed because I know they've been in this position before. So I just want to make sure that if we do agree on a deferment, that they're given some sort of comfort that this isn't going to be pulled from out from under them, and it's with the intention of trying to find a solution for them here.
Thank you, Councillor Whiteside. We've got Councillor Boyd again.
Yes, I think deferment is the right way forward, but I would like it only deferred until through one political cycle. So I'd like to think it would come up at the next, so within 6 weeks. This would give us time to sit down with the interested groups, with senior officers. I don't know if we're getting a chance to ask any questions of officers later on. But yeah, because I think we need to be open and transparent and ask the officers what their thoughts are on the situation that Councillor King mentioned about. Because I've had these conversations already with the head of Legal and Democratic about this, but until we really get to the bit where we can ask officers for any questions, we aren't there. But I think deferral's right. I think Councillor Whiteside's absolutely right. They've been let down so many times, so this can't drag on. These guys need to know what's going on and how secure they are. They put a lot of hard work into this as well, and therefore I'm erring on the side that we need to do this within one cycle so that we can bring it back, and hopefully all the things that need ironed out and all the questions we have can be sorted out.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Boyd. I've got Councillor Hans again.
Yeah, thank you, convener, for letting me speak again. Again, I would agree with Councillor Whiteside on this as well. I do want to make sure that we do have some safe net for the men's shed and all of this as well. And when I was saying I wanted to ask questions to officers, it was exactly that point about a 3-year break clause. Because I think until we know that, it's very, very difficult to know how to get this forward. But it's information we need. And can I ask that all Money Fief and Sid Law councillors and Carnoustie councillors are kept informed of progress for this one as well?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Hans. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, right. Thank you very much, Mr. Brunton.
Thank you.
And we'll next move to the report.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want to come in, Jackie, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Fairweather. What I was intending to do was to go through the report. I see what the councillors are saying in terms of the discussion, but I think it would be helpful if I pointed out some aspects of the CAP process and the framework, just so that we're clear about that. Obviously, the first part of the report deals with, in fact, the Invertay House, and just to mention that members will note that in terms of paragraph 3.1, that there was an appeal to the Scottish ministers, and the appeal was not upheld, and the details there in the report and in the link to the actual decision. So that's the first part. In terms onto Panmure Centre, I think there's aspects to just to be pointed out in terms of what a CAP application is, because you'll see from paragraph 3.2 of the report that the legislative framework requires councils to assess any of the requests transparently against specific criteria, which is what we've put in the report, but to also agree the request unless there's reasonable grounds for refusal. Now, in terms of the CAT application with the men's shed, they have in fact agreed to allow us until the end of November to consider the application, because there's a statutory time frame that affects all CAT applications. Unfortunately, when you look at the amount of work required to get to committee, the timeframes are quite tight. And that's why, with that in mind, and also with the impact of COVID, it has been necessary to ask the men's shed to continue until the end of November. So there would be an opportunity for the men's shed, if they so wish, to discuss matters with the Development Trust. But really the council are in a difficult position there in terms of brokering that, because this is actually a CAT application by the men's shed. And as I said, the council needs to consider whether they want to approve that request or not. In terms of reaching their decision, if you look at paragraph 3.5, it provides a bit of background there. So you need to compare the benefits of the application with the benefits that might arise from any alternative proposal. And in terms of that, that would be another asset transfer, and currently there's none at present. Another proposal to be made by the council, and again there really isn't one as such, other than continue with the current arrangement, or alternatively, you know, it's already been put up for in terms of the Agile programme, is on the list there in terms of that. Or the last alternative is if the council wanted to sell on the open market. So in terms of that, if there was a decision to defer it, that would really just be for the men's shed to see if they were agreeable to trying to come to some arrangement with the Development Trust. And it's not something that would in effect impact on the CAT application. We would then just need to consider it if there was no progress in terms of that and no consensus.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you for that, Jackie. Okay, let's wonder what night where to start. I would certainly be assuring Mr. Gamak. I believe this is a great project, and as Councillor Whiteside said, I feel for the men's shed, because the time this is taken. But I've also got to take note of particular issues that are still in place, and heating springs to mind. And what Mr. Gamak said, it's not going to be in full-time use by the men's shed. And he said he would be happy to negotiate the usage. I think we've had somebody coming in, that's Mr. Brunton, regarding the Carnoustie Development Trust, saying they would like to do that, and for some reason they've not been able to meet. Well, I think perhaps it's about time they did. This building that has been said is the use for the community, and the size of the building certainly that's what it should be, and I think we should be moving that's what it should be, should be for the community, and obviously with men shed and a big part of that. For me, it's and I think words were used by Mr. Brunton. It should we should be all working together, and I think it's that can we get everyone round the table, right, so we can move this forward. So I am going to move that, we defer this. We can, we've got till November, and we can bring forward a special meeting of P&R to consider this. In fact, we've probably the one before we're going we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to do as well. So I'm going to move that we do defer this today and ask for agreement of the committee.
Can I have a question first to officers, please, David?
Yes, you can, Councillor Boyd.
It's back to what we've all been discussing quite often, and a few people have mentioned it. What is the council's, what are they looking at of anything between a 10 and a 25-year lease? Because that's what we've been talking. You only get the funding if you have them for a longer period, but with a 3-year break. That would seem an absolute compromise to both parties here. But before we start, because Jackie says we're not allowed to brokerage any of this, we as the councillors need to know whether that is acceptable to interested parties. I also would like to think that we could have, I know maybe for the councillors all, so how many of us want to be involved in both Monteith and Carnoustie to brokerage this, but we would need the professional help of Ian Cochrane and Stuart Ball within that. So I would like the meetings that we have to have that and to discuss that lease of anything up to 25 years with a 3-year break. But what is the council's feeling of that?
Can somebody help?
Thank you, Chair. For yourself, if I may come in. I suppose, first of all, we need to go back to the fact that this is an application and it's the applicant who, in a community asset transfer, actually says what they're asking for, and indeed the level of rent and the likes of things that they are doing, and therefore the council needs to determine that. In terms of flexibility on a lease, then we are more than happy to be flexible. Indeed, I think it's already been referenced, the equivalent organisation in Arbroath had a 25-year lease, and I think, and I can't remember the exact details of why, but we were also looking indeed at a 12-month, a 1-year break clause on that. So to some extent, this falls to the men's shed, that if they were content with a 10-year lease and a 3-year break, then that is something that we could indeed facilitate, and that wouldn't be a problem for us. And certainly, if there is to be ongoing discussions, I'm happy that not necessarily myself, but members of my team will be involved in those discussions. So I trust that helps, Councillor Boyd.
Councillor Boyd, I'm sure that helps. You're on mute. You're saying yes. Okay, we've got Councillor Hans want to come back in.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask as well, but I have another couple. In addition to looking at the break clause and the length of lease, I wonder, when the discussions are taking place, is it possible to get someone from external funding involved who might have a better idea of the different requirements of some of the organisations that have been suggested for funding? And the other thing is, as well, is obviously we're talking about a lease length. It's almost a bit of a moot point at the moment in terms of when is that likely to start. And I just wanted to know, once an agreement is made in terms of the cap, whether yes, it's accepted or no, it's not, I presume there'll be leeway at the moment from when it actually physically starts, because we could be giving them, control of a building that basically, because of COVID, nobody can actually enter at the moment. So I just wanted to know what the implications of that would be on the starting of any agreement.
Okay, can somebody help Councillor Hans?
Again, if through yourself, convener, the start date would be my mutual agreement, and obviously we would need to come to a conclusion on that. And sorry, if you can, we might go back on the first query.
That one was just about the involvement of external funding, just so that they can get an idea of any lease lengths and the implications on potential funders, whether external funding would have that information for both.
Thank you. That's yeah, I can see Vivian's come on screen, so I was going to say probably better than me committing, colleague. So Vivian.
Vivian.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Councillor Hans. Yeah, to confirm that generally external funders, likes of the big lottery funding arrangements, are really looking for a 25-year lease in order to be able to invest the kinds of money that potentially we would be talking about for the kind of renewal in the heating systems and the green energy that you've talked about today. But certainly we could engage external funding in helping support any group that's wanting to take proposals forward.
Great, thank you.
Jackie, do you want to come back?
Yes, if I may, convener, it's just if members were inclined to defer the report, it was just to say, I completely understand the basis on which you'd want to do this in light of what you've heard today. But it was just to say, of course, this is a CAT application that needs to be determined in terms of the statutory framework for that. And however frustrating that is, I think it would be helpful if I understand the Development Trust are keen to meet and try and come to a mutually agreeable solution with the men's shed, but it'd be helpful maybe to hear from Mr. Gamick in terms of his view on that, because that would help significantly.
Okay, Mr. Gamick, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you. I'm a bit confused. I'm very worried by Mr. Brunton's input, because it seems to me he's devised a very elaborate scheme for developing the Panmure Centre, which it seems to me doesn't coincide or engage with although he says it does. It seems to me it doesn't really coincide or engage with us at all. He says we haven't arranged to meet him, but there hasn't really been any cause to have a meeting. I'm very uneasy and very uncomfortable about the whole thing. I mean, all right, I'm uncomfortable also about taking on the Panmure Centre with all that needs to be done, but I feel there's a confusion and a disconcerting confusion in what we've been presented with today. I don't know what the answer to it is. There's certainly, I'm not saying, in fact, I'm saying we should have discussions about this, but I'm very wary and not very optimistic about where we're going to get as a result of that. I'm sorry, that's maybe not very helpful, but these are the feelings I've been left with as a result of what's been said this afternoon.
Okay, thanks for that, George. I've got Councillor King.
Yes, convener. I've really got to go on one point, and that's a question to Mrs. Buchanan. I'm reading paragraph 3.2, which in brief, leaving bits out, the Act requires us to agree the request unless there are reasonable grounds for refusal. Now, in Mrs. Buchanan's earlier presentation, I understood to say that this had to be decided by November. If that is correct, we don't have time to take a long deferral. And we may have to say that this has got to be brought back no later than 4 weeks' time from today in a deferral. I'd just like Mrs. Buchanan to confirm the fact that we have a deadline of November. If not, we can let it go on a bit longer. But I do feel that there are interests that have to be put together in this so that we can get a uniform and acceptable way forward. I'm all for doing the capital transfer, but I don't want there to be any problems. But just for the sake of clarity, if we can't get agreement on this between the two parties, then there's no question about it in my mind. There is a valid application by the men's shed, and if we cannot get agreement between the two parties, that is what we have to decide, and we have nothing else on the table. It's a pity that Mr. Brunton and his team did not put a counter CART application on the table a year ago or 6 months ago, but they haven't done that, and it's too late to do it now. So can we have an answer from Mrs. Buchanan as to the deadlines when we have to reach a decision?
Jackie?
Yes, certainly, Councillor King, through yourself, Councillor Fairweather. The men's shed have agreed to an extension till the 30th of November because there is, as I said earlier, a statutory timeframe for this, and they agreed to allow us to continue until then before making a decision on this. So consequently, we can, of course, agree to defer it until that point. And, you know, if the committee were minded to do so, we could certainly do that. And we could also provide a briefing for members if that would be helpful. But you know, that does give you a little bit of time, but not much, certainly. But we need to be back by that date unless the men's shed would agree a further extension.
Yes, could I say that if the council wishes to request a further extension, if that would help facilitate this process, I'm sure we would be agreeable to that.
Convener, can I put into your suggestion for a deferral that it be deferred for a maximum of 3 weeks before being brought back, 4 weeks before being brought back to the committee to allow discussions to proceed? And if at that stage it's the men's shed feel they want to continue the application, that's up to them from the discussions. But at the moment, as a group, as a committee and as a council, we have to recognise there's a deadline of the 30th of November, and we have to have a further meeting at least a week, if not a fortnight, before that time, so that we know what's going on. I'm not suggesting I second you because Councillor Devine has already made the proposal and you've already accepted it. So proposers and seconders I'm not caring about, but I think you should both accept that we have to come back within 3 to 4 weeks.
Thank you, Councillor King. I've got Councillor Salmond.
Yes, thanks, Convener. It's really a question for Vivian Smith on Mr. Brunton's point about the 3 years. I'm not really understanding why he needs only 3 years for the external funding bids, and it's been pointed out that 10, 15, 20, 25 for other funders. Is Vivian able to appreciate Mr. Brunton's in a difficult position now that he's spoken to answer this, but would Vivian be able to maybe answer why she thinks he's asking for 3 years? Is there a specific reason?
I can't, Convener, speak for Mr. Brunton and his ask of 3 years, but my appreciation of that was that that would help them to design the Panmure Centre as they saw it going to be a sustainable centre for the future, to bring a feasibility together, and that 3 year period would enable the feasibility to be undertaken, and that funding for that would be able to be secured over a shorter term basis. But the longer term impact of changes and works to the Panmure Centre will require a longer lease if they want to attract the kinds of sums of money to actually make the changes to the building and make it a future sustainable operation. I hope that helps, Councillor Salmond.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay, I think we've spent enough time on this. What Councillor Devine brought forward, which I'm in agreement with certainly, and what Councillor King has said, that we could bring forward a meeting in 4 weeks time. So I'm going to ask colleagues that we move to defer this.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you.
Convener, can we just put into that the fact that there must be a meeting, we defer for a maximum of 4 weeks?
Yes, that's fine, Councillor King. I'm happy with that. Okay, we'll move on. Agenda item 11 is the Community Asset Transfer 2019-20 Annual Report. The report's by Jackie Buchanan. You've got the recommendations right in front of you. I don't know, Jackie, do you want to speak on this? You can say no.
I'm happy to answer any questions, Convener.
Okay, we've got the recommendations. Are there any questions? No. Any comments? No. Okay, we've got the recommendations in front of us. A notes, B is notes, C is notes, and D approves and E approves. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 12 is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act 2000 Annual Report. And again, it's the reports by the Director of Legal and Democratic Services. We've got the recommendation. Are there any questions? No. Any comments? No. Okay, the recommendations are 1, approve, 2, approve, 3, agree, and 4, note. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 13 is redress for survivors, historical child abuse and peers in care, Scotland Bill, again by the Director of Legal and Democratics. We've got the recommendations. Are there any questions? No. Any comments? Oh, Councillor Millen Douglas.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted firstly to welcome this paper, very clear paper, and to make one point, which is that this bill will hopefully become an act, while being extremely good news and right for the victims of abuse, potentially has very serious obligations for local authorities across Scotland, including our own. It's quite possible to work out that this could be about a £6 million bill for Angus Council. And although the paper makes it clear, and the referral back into the consultation progress makes clear that we are simply not in a position to fund that unless we get some funding ourselves. My point really is that this could go on now for a number of years, and I'm sure that officers and elected members over the coming years will keep their eyes very closely on this, because it could be a major obligation for ourselves. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that, Councillor McMillan Douglas. Any further questions or comments? No, we've got the recommendations. A is notes, B is notes, C is considers, and D is delegates. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, we go on to agenda item 14, and that's an offer to buy a non-surplus HRA asset at Ingalls Court, Edzell, and the reports by the Director of Communities. You've got the recommendations. Are there any questions? Councillor Miles.
Not a question, a comment. I'll wait for questions first if you like.
Yes, please. Any questions, Councillor Salmon?
Yes, I've got two questions, please, convener. One's for Kate Kirby in planning. I hope somebody from planning is with us today. And the other one would be for John Morrow. But if I do Kate's first, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
I'd like to know that if the council did agree today to dispose of the Ingalls Court site to a private developer, can you please tell me if there are any other available sites in Edzell for the council houses to be built on?
Certainly, Councillor, I can answer that question. The report does make reference to two sites that were in the 2016 local development plan that could deliver affordable housing within Edzell. The first was East Mains Farm. That site has recently been completed. It delivered a total of 13 units, including 3 affordable units. So that site is now off the book, so to speak. The other site is the allocation east of Jury Hill Road. That site is allocated for 50 houses. And we currently have an application with us for 57 houses, including 14 units of affordable housing to be delivered on site there. That application was validated back in June of this year, and it's yet to be determined. But in terms of the operation, the sort of tenure of those houses, that would still have to be determined and negotiated with the developer on that site. So those are the two sites that are available within the development boundaries of Edzell. Apart from that, members should also be aware that a planning permission was granted back in December of last year of 2019 for 6 affordable housing units at a site in Inchbeare, which is out with the development boundary, but it's adjacent to the development boundary. That application was approved in that location as it was considered to be in the public interest in terms of it was delivering affordable housing where there's a need. But there were no available sites within the development boundary to deliver that. And that approach is in line with our local development plan policy. So in terms of the delivery of council housing within the development boundaries of Edzell, there are very limited opportunities. If the Ingalls Court site were to come to the open market, there would of course be an opportunity for that to be developed for open market residential. And as part of the planning process, we would seek to secure the council policy 25% of affordable housing units on that site. And if we assume the capacity is as set out in the report, 20 units, we would look to secure 5 units on that site of affordable housing. But again, the type and tenure of that affordable housing would be in the hands of the developer in negotiation with us.
Thank you. Can you just remind me who the applicant is for the Jury Hill site, please?
The applicant is the Guild Homes Tayside on the Jury Hill Road.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Morrow a question, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Morrow, can I ask you to explain the difference between a piece of land or building on the council's general fund as against on the HRA account? And can you explain the difference methods that would be used in disposal of either, please?
Yeah, Councillor Simon, I mean, as you know, the difference between accounts within the council, the one being general fund, assets held in the general fund are funded from councils and also grant from government as well.
John, we're not hearing you.
Hold on, I'll switch my camera off. Can you hear me any better now?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So there's a difference between the general fund, councillor, as you know, and the housing revenue account. So assets held on the general fund are essentially funded by council tax and by grant from central government. Assets owned by the housing revenue account are essentially owned and funded by rent from council tax rent payers. So that's the difference between the two accounts, and that the housing revenue account is run almost as a separate business, which means that when it comes to developing sites owned by the housing revenue account, the benefits of whatever we do with that site have to feed back to benefit the rent payers rather than council taxpayers. So if we were to put a housing revenue account site onto the open market, if that was sold, the proceeds from that sale would again have to go back and benefit the rent payers and wouldn't go to the general fund. In this case, obviously, our feeling is that this is a site that's within our control and it can play a major part in us delivering on the local housing strategy and the strategic housing investment plan. And this site is a part of that strategic housing investment plan, which has been developed with partners, that's housing associations, the Health and Social Care Partnership, and importantly, the Scottish Government as well. So both that local housing strategy and the strategic housing investment plan are developed and agreed between those partners. And that's why the Scottish Government then provides some substantial funding towards developing the project that we've put forward for this site. So that is the difference between the HR and the general fund. So housing revenue account assets are used for the benefit of the rent payers, the tenants, and any sale of any proceeds from any sale would also have to benefit the tenants.
Thank you. And can you just expand a little bit on how, if we were to dispose of this site, that would be treated as from a consultation process, and the detail we have to go through before it can actually be finally disposed of? I know it's in the report, but I think it's helpful to remind people.
Yes, I mean, again, if we were to propose putting this onto the open market, be particularly important that we would have to consult more than we usually do. It already, as I say, forms part of our strategic housing investment plan. But if we were to propose putting it on the open market, we would have to consult then with our tenant steering group, and then potentially with the wider tenant base. A consultation with others, so for instance, residents in EDS or other Angus Council residents, wouldn't be as relevant because it's an HRA asset, and therefore, again, it's the rent payers, the tenants, the council tenants are the relevant customers that we would have to consult with. And what we usually do is we have a tenant steering group that are the voices for the wider tenant group, and we consult with them on putting together our strategic housing investment plan and our local housing strategy. On individual sites, if we wish to propose putting on the open market, they would be the initial consultees, and their voice is obviously very important when we're putting together our programs and our projects.
Thank you, that's been helpful.
Okay, is that everything, Councillor Salmond?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm just, I see there's 4 hands here. I'll go to Councillor Boyd.
Sorry, Kate Cowie clarified the situation about the 25% that a developer would have to do with affordable housing and clarified what the affordable housing is. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Councillor Boyd. Councillor King.
Yes, can I ask Mr. Morrow a couple of questions? One, what is the proposed mix and number of houses that would go on this site? I can't find that anywhere in the report when I'm scanning through it.
Yeah, Councillor King, we're intending to deliver around 20. We haven't finalised the final mix yet, but it's around 20 new units that we propose. And maybe if I can give you a kind of a percentage breakdown, it's 60%. They would all be mainstream properties available to anybody on the waiting list. 60% would be own door, 1-bedroom flats. Around about 30% would be 2-bedroom and 10% would be 3-bedroom. And that mix is designed to meet the known waiting list of the profile of different households on the waiting list. And we've got about around, I think, between 200 and 230 people on the waiting list for mainstream properties of that type in Edzell.
In broad terms, I'm not committing you, that's 12 single-bedroom houses, 6 2-bedroom houses, and 2 3-bedroom houses. Is that correct?
Yeah, your maths as usual, Councillor King, is perfect.
Yeah, I'm just doing another bit of maths while I'm at it. As far as I can see, that takes in about somewhere on about 48 or so bed spaces.
It's actually slightly more than that, because the size of the bedrooms that we provide are designed to meet what's called the housing for varying needs. Right. When we design our council properties, the size of the bedrooms usually accommodates at least a double bedroom or twin beds. Yeah. What that means is, in terms of bed spaces, we would achieve at least 61 or possibly more than that bed spaces.
Cool. Second question, if you would let me go on, convener. The demand for housing in the North Angus and in particular the Edsall area is no longer from retired people. It is more from mainstream. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. The reason that we're proposing removing the sheltered housing that's currently on the site is because we've seen demand drop away for that type of sheltered social housing since around about 2012, 2013. It's been reducing. That's because we do have quite a large supply of sheltered housing for social rent across Angus, and that includes in the North housing market area. So what we're proposing is to replace that with mainstream accommodation, and as is where the demand is still healthy, and there's a sustainable demand for that for the next 30 years or so. So it's replacing what is retirement or sheltered housing with mainstream accommodation that's available to anybody.
Right. On that basis, Mr. Morrow, can you tell me, other than the fact that this particular building is currently designated for as retirement housing, is there any difference between what we're proposing to do in Edsall than what we are doing in Emislaw Drive and the Newtons in Arbroath, where we are demolishing 1960s, 1970s housing, which were in blocks of flats and were extremely hard to let, as is Ingalls Court, and replacing them with more appropriate front door, back door accommodation?
Yeah, that is correct. What we're doing is we're carrying on our strategic approach to regeneration. So as you say, we've identified several places across Angus currently and in the past where demand has reduced for one reason or another. And it's mostly because there's been a change in demographics and there are different household profiles now than there used to be. People have different expectations, and the policy arena has changed as well. So exactly as you say, we are taking down blocks and have taken down blocks in the Emislaw Drive as part of the Timber Greens regeneration. And that again is because the demand not sustainable, and there comes a point where we have to remove if a good proportion of them empty and we can't get customers to live in them. So we replace those with high quality affordable units that have their doors and have their own garden space, and that meets both people's needs and their expectations.
And final question, that these houses are affordable houses for rent, and the current Scottish Government regulations prevent them from being sold. So this would mean that there would be permanent facilities for people to have affordable rented housing in Edsall, rather than the proposals which seem to be coming from the interested buyer, which would tend towards sale.
Yes, our proposals would provide security of tenure, and as you say, council housing for rent. As you know, the right to buy was removed a few years ago, and what that means is that we can provide sustainable housing options for people on lower incomes to rent, in this case in Edsall, for our business plan lasts for 60 years. So the reason that we deliver a high specification, high quality houses in our new build design is because we consider the lifetime life cycle costs of maintenance for those buildings over that period of 60 years, and the advantage that gives for people on lower incomes in a place like Edsall is it means they can plan for the long term because they have security of tenure. It means they can establish good employment options in the area, and it also means that people can study with the security of knowing that they're not going to have to move on if that's what they choose. So you're right. In terms of Edsall, we feel it's important to provide that affordable housing option for rent, rather than relying on the private sector. The private sector obviously has a place in delivering a range of tenures and range of options for people, but it's important that we feel that we achieve a mix in our rural village centres as well as our towns, and that mix really needs to reflect a level of social housing for rent, and in this case around about 20 mainstream homes is what we proposed, and that's matched against the demand that we know is there from the studies that we've done in terms of the North housing market area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Anything else? Anything else, John, that you wish to add? Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor McMillan Douglas. Councillor McMillan Douglas.
I'm so sorry, Convener. I think I'm off mute now. I couldn't get off mute. I do apologise. Yeah, I would like to ask John Morrow or Stuart Paul, whoever wishes to answer. I realise here I'm balancing between green paper and white paper, but is the Scottish Government subsidy for Angus Council to develop this site approximately 5 times the value of the offer that we've got on the table?
Could I come in, Convener? Sorry to interrupt, but I think we're still in public session. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we need to watch discussing matters that are related to the appendix.
Well, that's why I put it in relative value rather than actual value. But if you think that is still, I can't ask that, then I will withdraw it.
Yeah, can we ask that at the next session, please, Councillor McMillan?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Duff.
Yes, Convener, I think my question was along the same lines as Councillor McMillan Douglas.
Okay, can we leave it then till the next session?
Okay, if you want to do it that way, yep.
Please. Councillor Hans.
Yeah, I'm going to ask half a question now and the other half in private session. Mr. Morrow, you answered one of my other questions earlier as well. You said that the life build is around about 60 years for the 20 properties. And I know this is a horrible, horrible question to ask you, and I apologise, but could you tell me roughly how much rent over the 60 years you think you would obtain for these 20 properties that would go back into the HRA?
Can you give me a couple of minutes to do the calculation? I'll come back to you on that one.
The appropriate question for the private session. It's revealing financial information, and I don't think it should be.
Yeah, you're right. Can we leave that? I'm having real problems here. A meeting a few weeks ago, right? I was getting attacked by a young Dalmatian dog, which is actually attacking me right at this present time and trying to take my left hand off. And now my shoe. So please, if I get a little bit flustered, you'll know what's going on again. Oh dear. Okay, right, Councillor Whiteside, do you want to come?
Your knee.
Thanks, Convener. Just a very quick question for John Morrow, please. We've heard quite a lot about the standard of housing that Angus Council build for social rent, sustainable building, a good standard of insulation. Am I right in saying that this is likely to reduce the amount of fuel poverty of any future tenants in the houses compared to private builds?
Yeah, Councillor Whiteside, one of the reasons that, as you say, that we build to a high specification exceeding the current building standards is that we are, as you say, planning for 60 years. And also what we try and do is ensure that we have a high level of thermal capacity, thermal insulation in the fabric. And what that means is that the tenants who move into our new homes have much reduced fuel bills. And as you rightly say, what that means is that it mitigates fuel poverty and also child poverty as well. If we can reduce the outgoings for people on relatively low incomes, it means they can obviously focus on providing food for their children. So it benefits both those things, fuel poverty and child poverty. And the other aspect that we are focusing our designs on is achieving zero carbon by 2045. So that the new builds that we're building now have very high levels of insulation and are also moving to more sustainable forms of heating. And that is so that we don't have to revisit these properties in 10 or 20 years. We're designing them now to meet that zero carbon standard. So we're investing extra at the moment on a high level of specification so that we don't have to go back and refurbish them again in 20 years.
Thank you, John. Councillor Sturrock.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, just a query. It relates to point 36 on page 204. You mentioned that the current housing list is for 215 people in Edzell. I was just curious, what is the population of Edzell, or is this 215 over a wider area with surrounding Edzell? I'm just querying the percentage. That's all.
Councillor Sturrock, to be honest, I don't know what the population of Edzell is, but in terms of the 215 people, that's the number of people on our waiting list who have expressed a desire to live in the North Angus housing market area, and specifically mentioned Edzell as one of the places that they would look for accommodation. It doesn't mean that all those 215 people are in Edzell. But they may wish to move there. It might be that they've got employment in the local area and would rather move to somewhere closer to that employment. But as I say, it doesn't mean to say they're actually in Edzell at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sturrock. Councillor Miles.
Are you ready for a comment now, convener?
Yes, I'll go comments, Councillor Miles.
Right, thank you. And to answer Councillor Sturrock's point, the population of Edzell is just under 1,000. It's about 900 odds, depending if you're counting children or everything else. But the wider area obviously is far more. But to give you a little background, I've known this property ever since it was developed way back, and it was historically a very popular property with a lot of demand for this type of housing. Now, that was in the time when there was a warden living on site. Now, this was required or beneficial for the elderly that wished to go in there as a type of retirement home. Now, when the Scottish Government decided to change that to the self-directed support issue and the warden was removed, then it became less popular, hence the reason we had difficulty letting it, and hence the reason the amount of voids there. I do know that there's a survey out there by the developer asking what the public want, and one of the options he's asking, do you want the sheltered housing with a warden? Well, I think if the question was asked, most people would say yes, but what they don't know is that is no longer available to be delivered unless it's done at the householder's own expense, and that would be quite expensive. So there's a little dubiety or confusion in there in the general public about what can or can't be done there. The condition of the buildings is fair at the moment. There's not a big problem with the buildings, but they're not in the eco-friendly status that we would be if we were converting them. And in a matter of 5-10 years, they would probably need quite a considerable amount of money spent on them to upgrade them to the eco-friendly and insulated standard that we now require. So although they're in a fair condition just now, could be let out at the moment, they would need a considerable amount of money spent on them to bring them up to our standard. The other problem I have, much as I'd like to sell off and get money for the council coffers or the HRA fund, the problem is if we were to do that, we would lose the government grant that we're getting to develop. And as has been intimated, it is considerably more than the buildings would, well, first offer is, or even if it's going on the open market, it's considerably more than it would attract in an open market value. So for getting value for money for the council, I think we have to go down the route as suggested, develop them into the 20 or so properties that could be delivered with the government grant, and create properties for the future for up to 60 years as was suggested. So I do believe that rejecting the offer is the best, and best value for money for the council at the moment. Much as I don't have any problem with developers putting in offers for buildings. But in this instance, the council would be losing out on that. So hence the reason I support the paper as is.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Okay, have we got any further comments?
Yes, convener. My point of order. We have not yet been able to consider the exempt paper on the item. It's issued as an appendix to this report. Can we go into private session before we make this decision? I am asking that of Mrs. Buchanan.
Mrs. Buchanan?
Yes, certainly if members have questions in and around and want to discuss the exempt appendix, then that would be the way to do that.
Fine, I would move then, convener, that we move into private session so that we can have a discussion on the contents of item 16.
Okay, committee, is that agreed? Okay, we'll move into private session.
So that means we have to come back and re-enter on the alternate access.
Yes.
Okay.
Could we have 5 minutes?
Yes, I'm
Thank
sure
you.
we can. I'm needing it.
You need to tie that dog up.